Welcome to the Meez podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Meez, the culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, I'll be interviewing world-class entrepreneurs in the food space that are shifting the paradigm of how we innovate and operate in our industry. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Yo, they say art mirrors life with every stroke of the pencil. I'm giving you folks a glimpse into.
Today is Meez's first ever in-person podcast, live in sunny San Diego with my good friend, chef-writer Andrew Friedman. Most of what we're going to talk about today is Andrew's new book, The Dish. And if you don't know Andrew, he's written and collaborated on dozens of cookbooks and projects with pretty much every chef that you can think of. His prior book, Chefs, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, which came out about 5 years ago, chronicles the evolution of the American chef in the 1970s and 80s. Some of his other books are Knives at Dawn, about America's quest for gold at the Bocuse d'Or. He has another one called Don't Try This at Home. It's culinary catastrophes of the world's greatest chefs. Think chefs like, Wiley Dufresne and Daniel Boulud and, just crazy mistakes that they may have made. He also wrote the memoir for James Blake. Andrew has this affinity for the game of tennis. He loves playing it. And we talk a little about that today in the podcast. He is an adjunct professor at the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park for the School of Graduate and Professional Studies. And, I read the remainder of the new book, The Dish, on the plane ride out to San Diego from New York. And I have to tell you, I'm not just saying this, I freaking loved it. He tells the story of one dish from a restaurant called Wherewithal in Chicago. Beverly and Johnny are just incredible chefs, and they have another restaurant called Parachute. But this book centers specifically on one dish from one night of service. And what he does is he just pulls out every single person involved, every single farmer involved, every single ingredient. It really tells the story of each of those people and each of those ingredients. And it just gives you a new perspective on the food and the dish. And you really start to appreciate not just the work that goes into food, which as a chef, obviously we know that, but you think a lot more about all of the people involved and all the experiences they have and all the baggage they have and how that impacts the dish that you eat. And I love the ending. I love all the transitions in the book and just generally just had such a great time reading it. And, when you have one of those books that you read and you close it and you're like, man, that was awesome. And I texted Andrew right away because I was so excited to talk about it. So we talk about that today, among other things. And like I said, it was our first live podcast. So it was a lot of fun, great weather. I hope the audio is okay because there were a lot of people doing, work around us. But anyway, as always, I hope that you enjoy the show as much as I did, and I hope that you go and check out the book, The Dish. You can order it wherever you get your books. Maybe that's a local bookstore, which would be nice, or Amazon.com, obviously. So thanks and enjoy the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. At long last.
I'm so grateful and honored to have you here.
Oh my gosh.
And this is a long time coming because I've learned a lot about how to actually make a podcast from you. And we work with you on your podcast. But for anybody in the world that might not know who you are, we're going to do a little bit of background. I'll share a little bit and then maybe you can just fill in the blanks.
Sure.
So you were in film and TV.
I was.
And then you got into writing, which I wanted to ask about, writing about food specifically. You wrote Chefs, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, Knives at Dawn about Bocuse d'Or. And I am reading from this, by the way, just so you guys know.
You don't have my biography memorized?
Some of it I do, but I forget some. Don't Try This at Home, which I want to hear about because I never even heard about it, but it's about a book about just screw-ups in the kitchen. You are really into tennis, so you wrote James Blake's memoir. You have a podcast, and you have a new book coming out that we're going to talk about a lot today called The Dish.
And I'm teaching at the CIA.
And you are an adjunct professor at the CIA.
True.
What program do you teach?
It's a new master's program, and I'm teaching, right now, just one course that I developed for them. It has a fancier name than this, but it's essentially a history of the chef profession and restaurants as part of that, with a focus on Europe, mainly France, and on the United States, and mostly dialed in on the 20th and what we've lived so far of the 21st century.
Wow. How did you become an adjunct professor at CIA?
To my everlasting amazement, they asked me to do it, and that's how it happened. There wasn't like an ad on Craigslist. There wasn't a post. I know some people there, and I got a text, I think it was, asking if I'd have any interest in talking to them. And like that.
Wow. Did I miss anything? Any big
If you
notes in
did,
here?
they don't. I mean, people don't need. That's more information than anybody needs about me.
All right. Well,
unless they want to track me down and kill me.
Well, we're going to talk a lot about writing today, and this book, which I finished on the plane ride on the way over here, and the ending is friggin' incredible. I mean, the whole book is awesome. It just really changed my perspective.
Wow.
Before we get going on that, though, I had a gift for you. We give to many
Finally.
of our many of the Meez folks. This is a Grey Kuntz special edition spoon with a little note for me in here that you are an honorary chef to us now. So please,
thank you very much for that.
Gift.
That's a huge compliment. And this, I've been wanting this forever. So thank you. Should I open it now? No, I'm just kidding.
You can if you want to. Yeah, why don't you do a little reveal?
I'll show everyone the Kuntz spoon.
A little unboxing.
Sadly, we have to tell people who Grey Kuntz is.
If you don't know who Grey Kuntz is and you are a chef, then I don't want to say shame on you, but a little bit shame on you. He is one of the greatest chefs of our time. He really revolutionized not just what you would think of as fusion cuisine, because he doesn't do fusion, but he had a background in Southeast Asian cuisine, is Swiss-born, French-trained under Freddie Girardet, and it's just changed the game for flavor profiles and cooking, and he's just an incredible chef and was a mentor of mine for many years. So I give everyone his spoon. He has an eponymous spoon called the Kuntz spoon. It is 22 milliliters and is the perfect shape to do everything from airze, a piece of fish, to get sauce out of a pan, to use it like a spatula. You can kind of use it like anything. It's really versatile in the kitchen. And every chef should have one. And now, Andrew, you have one.
Thank you.
So why did you get into writing about food?
It's a really long story that I'll pare down as much as I can. It was completely accidental. I grew up wanting to be a screenwriter and maybe a producer, maybe a director, but definitely a screenwriter. Spent 5 years doing that right out of college. Ironically, I made a ton of connections, but it was I had a job as basically a right arm to film producers. And it was so all consuming, the work, that I had all these great contacts and I had absolutely no time to write. So I quit my job one day and literally just, to make a living, I answered an ad for a job with a PR firm in New York, which at the time was the top restaurant PR firm in New York City. It was called Kratz & Company. It was run by a guy named David Kratz. It was really the big fish in New York City. And a lot of people who have their own agencies now started there. And honestly, I just needed a day job. I was like, that sounds like something for a writer to do, write press releases. And they happened at the time to be the top restaurant PR firm in New York City. And next thing I knew, I was representing, Alfred Portali at the Gotham Bar and Grill and Marcus Samuelson when he was 24 years old and had just been hired at Aquavit, and Rocco DeSpirito when he was at Union Pacific. And these people all became friends of mine, and I kind of got really interested in that world. And then Alfred asked me to write the Gotham Bar and Grill cookbook with him because we had a great rapport. And I thought it would just be a one-time kind of lark. And then the book did great. We won the IACP Julia Child Cookbook Award for Best Chef or Restaurant Book. We were nominated for Best General Cookbook at the Beards. And I thought, I never really wanted to do this, but maybe this is a way to not put on a suit and tie and have clients and have somewhere to be at, 9 a.m. every day. And I quit my job and started looking for projects. And that was almost 25 years ago and more than 30 projects ago. Started as a collaborator and then realized one day, it was actually kind of a funny story the way it happened, but I realized I'd accidentally become an expert on chefs. And that was an epiphany for me. And that's when I started trying to do my own stuff.
What do you mean by an expert on chefs?
I just felt like I had developed because, I was a collaborator on a lot of cookbooks and a memoir or two. And I was spending a ton of time in kitchens. I was meeting friends of mine who were chefs and cooks after they got out, like meeting them it's gotten earlier over the years, but meeting them at like 11:30, for a post-shift drink.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, I think I had as much understanding of the life as someone who never lived it could have. So I wouldn't compare myself to any chef writers like the late Tony Bourdain or somebody like Gabrielle Hamilton, or Dan Bart, like those people, they live it. I observe it. But I just felt like I knew an awful lot.
Yeah.
And I decided I was going to start, I'd written 20-some cookbooks around that time. And I thought, and I, in fact, sold a cookbook of my own, an idea. And I so didn't want to write it, I realized I gave the money back and canceled the contract.
Wow. What kind of cookbook was it?
It's still a great idea. It was not my idea, so I can say it was a great idea. A friend of mine said to me one day, my wife and I used to have a weekend place upstate. We don't anymore. And a friend of mine had been up there with us, and we were driving back to the city. And I don't know if you've ever had anyone like this in your life, but I know when I've told this story to friends who are chefs, they're like, oh yeah, I have friends like that. When he would come visit us and I would like cook a big dinner, like on Saturday night, he would like get a cocktail or a beer or something. He would just stand in the doorway of the kitchen and like watch me cook. And we would talk a little, but he was just, and I'm not a professional. I mean, I'd been to cooking school. I'm not a professional cook. And we were driving back on Sunday afternoon, and he said, you need to have a project of your own. You got to stop collaborating. And I said, well, I don't have an idea for a project of my own. And he was in film and television, right? So he's like very concept oriented. And he goes, give me a minute, literally. And he goes, like this in the back seat. And he goes, okay, here it is. The Weekend Warrior Cookbook. And I'm like, what is that? And he goes, well, and at this time, everyone was doing 10 ingredients or less and 30-minute meat. He goes, this is the counter programming to all that. It's for people who, instead of playing golf or going fishing or gardening, their weekend project is cooking. Yeah. And it's ambitious things for the weekend warrior cook, right?
It's so funny because now that is definitely a thing.
Oh, sure.
Oh,
no. I mean, I sold the book. I had tested, enough recipes to write a proposal. And then I started imagining doing the whole thing and doing all my own recipes and the PR. Like, I'm like, do I want to be this person, like the weekend warrior? I kind of pictured that person as like, a silly catchphrase uttering, just an idiot. So I'm like, I don't want to be that. I'm not that guy. I don't want to be that guy. And it was years until I started after that doing my own thing. Yeah. And I realized I wasn't a food writer. I refer to myself as a chef writer. I think I'm still the only person who does that. I'm trying to make it a thing, but I'm about to embark on a cookbook project with a good friend of mine, but I haven't written a cookbook since 2014, I mean, even at that point, I had started doing my own nonfiction, but I've been totally dialed in on, memoirs and my own stuff.
Yeah.
And my show.
Yeah, you definitely write about chefs far more than food.
I haven't written a recipe in a decade.
What was Chef's Drugs and Rock and Roll about for anybody that is, I guess, a millennial or maybe younger?
I don't know.
What year did it come out?
5 years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought it was longer than that.
No,
Wow.
2018.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, there was a plague. The plague throws off one's sense of time.
Gee, that's nuts.
Yeah, it came out February 28th, 2018. Yeah.
What was the premise? Why did you write it?
Well, it's basically about the American chef, whatever you want to call it, explosion, revolution, proliferation that happened in the 70s and 80s. We didn't really have famous American chefs before that. I'm talking about restaurant chefs. I'm not talking about Julia Child or the Galloping Gourmet or people like that. I'm talking about people who were chefs in restaurants. The cliche, although it's true, of the time before this was if you were an American and you were in a kitchen, you'd probably taken a wrong turn somewhere along the way, and this was kind of your last resort job. And then all these young Americans started getting turned on to the idea of food and cooking and working in restaurants. And the funny thing is, the first book I did, when I first got around the business was 1993 when I took that PR job. My book ends in 1993. And I didn't realize that until I'd kind of almost finished it. But when I started to meet all these chefs, many of whom were part of that generation, and I'd go out with them after working on their books, or I'd meet them, or I'd be out with a group of them. And, they were talking about a time, maybe 5-10 years before we were sitting there having a drink. And it just felt like they were talking about a completely different era.
Yeah.
How hard it was to get into French kitchens, deciding to go to culinary school. Their families all thought they were nuts. A lot of them were what we would today call career changers. And I just wanted to look at how and why did this happen? How and why did this thing that's, really took hold, and it's done nothing but grow over the years. How did we get here? How did we develop an American restaurant cuisine? Like, that didn't exist before this time. We didn't have signature dishes by American chefs.
Yeah.
It just didn't exist. I mean, yes, you could point to the rare examples. Somebody like Edna Lewis, who was in the chef in New York City and known starting in 1949. That's an outlier. That's an amazing story that I don't know why there's not a movie about that. I mean, I don't know. As a Black woman in 1949, from the, that's just a whole anomaly. But there were outliers like that, but they were, very few and far between. And I wanted to look at what were the factors that made this happen. And it ends with the launch of the Food Network, so it was right when the whole celebrity notion was becoming really entrenched. And I wanted to write that book, for better or for worse. It took me 5 years to finish it.
Who are some of there's a cover with these chefs, but maybe just for the audience, some of the key chefs that you covered in that book.
Well, the cover is the original opening team at Michael's Santa Monica, Michael McCarty's really important restaurant. And on the cover is a guy named Ken Frank, who's currently at La Toque in the city of Napa in California, and the late Mark Peel, who we just lost about a year and a half ago, and Jonathan Waxman, who started off as a sous chef there. And when Ken left after 3 months, Jonathan became the chef. Ken's often omitted from that restaurant's history by the people who were there. They just talk about Jonathan being the chef, but Ken was the opening chef. And then the fourth guy on the cover is actually Michael McCarty himself. And it's a great picture that was very intentionally posed and staged, a photograph to make chefs look like a band, right? And it's a very famous picture now. Both Ruth Reichel and I consider it like our favorite chef picture of all time. It's just the best picture. Figures in the book are, the usual suspects like Alice Waters and Jeremiah Tower and Jonathan Waxman and Wolfgang Puck and Barry Wine from the Quilted Giraffe in New York, and David and Karen Waltuck from Chanterelle in New York City, and Charlie Palmer and David Burke. It's more or less who people would expect. But then there's people, honestly, many of whom I didn't know about myself at that time. There's a gentleman named Bruce Martyr, who's on page 1 of the book, doing acid in the back of a van on a camping beach overseas. And that was the moment he had a revelation that he wanted to be a chef. But, Bruce is somebody who never really had a publicist, isn't the most socially minded guy. He doesn't he doesn't do the charity events, and he doesn't pal around with a lot of chefs. And consequently, he's been left out of a lot of history. But if you talk to somebody like Ruth or Evan Kleinman in LA, they'll all tell you that Bruce, before almost anyone else, was doing what we would call California cuisine now. It's just that he was on the west side of LA. There was no internet, obviously. And so he was kind of off the beaten path, but he had a huge following at the West Beach Cafe. And then he had a restaurant called Rebecca's, which was a modern Mexican restaurant with a design by Frank Gehry, the legendary architect Frank Gehry. And then he had a huge hangar-sized restaurant called DC3 out near LAX. He was one of the chefs behind the Broadway Deli, which was a huge, popular spot back in the day. And, he still has a restaurant called Capo in Santa Monica, which is one of the hardest reservations in town. It may have used to be the highest ticket average in town, but I think now there's probably competition for that. But it's like a little clubby restaurant that serves Bruce's version of Italian food. I love that restaurant. And, but Bruce is someone who, until I put him on page 1 of my book, barely got any play. And he was fine with it. Bruce is a businessman and a chef, and his businesses do very well. But that was also very instructive to me in terms of who gets left out of history, because most awards, all this stuff, a lot of it's popularity, a lot of it's PR, some of it's politics, and Bruce, for no discernible reason, except that I don't think he was friends with that many people, and maybe some people didn't like him too much, just kind of got omitted, and that's messed up to me. I had people who ignored my last book, media, who ignored it. I think probably because for whatever reason, they don't like me. I have a suspicion. And to me, that's just lame. If you're a journalist, if you're covering a subject, you don't leave people out because you don't personally have an affinity for them. That's not what we're here for. Yeah. So that was really, he was when he started to come up in interviews, I was like, who is he? And he was right there, operating restaurants.
Yeah.
Still, and he's about to open a capa, not about like next week, but he's going to build a capo in St. Helena in the Napa Valley, which is a really smart move by him. So, yeah.
I mean, there's a difference between you can be an incredibly successful restaurant operator and not an awarded chef. And you could be a very, very, awarded chef with a lot of accolades and James Beard Awards and not be a successful restaurant operator. It's in the same way that you can be a successful writer and not be on, certain, publications. Because if you sell the books, you sell the books. People like it and they buy it.
No, I'm talking about influence.
Yeah,
like Bruce
well, that's true,
was
though.
an influence. I know because I've talked to them. Chefs used to go there to see what he was up to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying they plagiarized, but they got inspiration from him.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Is he, for all intents and purposes, still very successful? Just didn't have.
No, but I don't know how you leave someone like that out of the storytelling. That's what I'm saying. And people have, Coleman Andrews wrote a book. I think it was called My Usual Table, which was sort of a biography done. Each chapter was about a restaurant and a time in his life. And the West Beach Cafe is one of the restaurants in there. And he was there. He knew Bruce at the time. And it's a great portrait of Bruce, So there are people who have. But I just find just kind of the ignoring of certain people to be kind of weird.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, if you're going to write that book again today, do you think it's tough because that was sort of almost like a period piece about that time. So that was published 5 years ago, even though it was about, many years prior. But even from 5 years ago till today, the industry has changed a lot. If you were going to do a new version of that today, what do you think would be different?
Well, the thing I thought about doing was a sequel, like from 93 to now, right? If I'm really honest, I think it might have been, for me, it might have been a little depressing because that was such the whole thing about that time that I wrote about is it was such an innocent time. You talk to almost anybody who came up then and you ask them like, what was your goal when you started cooking or when you decided to go to culinary school? And they're like, I just wanted to cook.
Yeah.
It was that time. It was like, that term, people would take time to find themselves. This was that time. This was, as my title suggests, it was the sex, drugs, and rock and roll era. The number of people who, either on the record or off, who told me what a transformative experience, dropping acid was. Even Alice Waters, admits to dropping acid once and how it made everything seem possible, Oh, I can see it. I just mean, a lot of people won't even admit, won't cop to it. It was such an innocent time. And the book ends right when people were starting to have more than one restaurant and starting to not be in their restaurants. And, Wolfgang Puck, when he opened he had Spago. And then when he opened Chinois on Main, his second restaurant with his ex-wife, business partner, Barbara Lazaroff, when he opened that second restaurant, people who were there talk about he would like agonize over which restaurant to be at, or he'd spend time at one and then go to the other one on the same night because he felt like he had, that used to be the psyche, right? And I'm not complaining. I always say this, things change. Whenever an older friend of mine starts bitching and moaning, I always go, things change, and it's really amusing to me when people from that era complain about change because they turn the whole world on its head. People thought they were like, I can't say who it was, but a very successful person in the industry once when Momofuku Sambar got 3 stars from the New York Times. This person was apoplectic, just absolutely furious. And, how can you give 3 stars to a restaurant? The waiters are in t-shirts and there's no backs on the chairs and they're not even chairs, they're benches, And I go, do you not understand that this is the way the Francophiles talked about you guys, when you started? It's a good thing when things change, And I think the minute you stop being open to that is when you start becoming old, Yeah.
The only constant is that things always change.
But they should.
Yeah, exactly.
They should. But, so to me, the second book, if I were going to do it, I started thinking of it as sort of like Godfather Part 2. It just started to seem dark to me. Like it was all going to be about money and all the ugly stuff that came out. And
sounds like a fun book too.
But the other thing is, just to be completely frank, because it is a factor in anyone's life and especially a writer, I have twins who are only 1 year into college right now. I can't take 5 years to write a book.
Yeah.
I don't have time. I mean,
Yeah.
This book right here, I wrote it in a year.
Wow.
The research
Wow.
happened quickly, but then the writing took about a year. Those are the kind of books I need to be doing right now.
It's still a long time to write a book.
Yeah.
Well, that's a perfect segue into this book. I can't tell you, and I'm not just saying it because I would tell you either off air or on air if I thought something, else of it. But man, I just really love this book. It really touched me.
Much.
It touched me because, as a chef, I think we obviously have an appreciation for how food is made because we run kitchens and we know it's an incredible amount of work and there's an incredible amount of effort that goes into things. And you have to have a lot of skill and perseverance and discipline and organization and mise en place. And it's just fucking hard to run a kitchen. But I never thought about everything else that goes into the food that we create from a socioeconomic standpoint, from a social and psychological standpoint, from a mental standpoint, from all the people involved. And it totally changed my perspective of how I look at food now and makes me way more mindful of it. And so as a chef, this book has helped me just have a better perspective and a new vantage, an appreciation for the food that I eat on a plate. And for a diner, it's going to have the same thing. And this is I probably shouldn't say this. I know it's sort of, take it for what it's worth, but to me, it has the quality of the modern day Kitchen Confidential in that it tells
Don't
the
say
story.
that out loud.
Well, we can cut it if you want, but it's
No,
but
it's the high. I mean, there's no higher praise, but
it's the reason why that came to me is as I finished the book was, that what Kitchen Confidential did was really like open the curtain to something that many people didn't know, and then many people that did know didn't talk about, and that others that were going to start in the industry needed to know, and it still inspired them to go and cook. And I think this book is a completely different vantage and a completely different door in which to look, to open into the industry. But it does the same thing in that it inspires you to really appreciate, the industry and the restaurant and the kitchen in a personal way. And I'm excited for chefs to read this. I'm excited for diners to read this. And I'm also excited for young cooks and aspiring cooks, kids that want to cook, to read this, because I think it's going to inspire them to want to do it. And no matter what background you come from.
Thank you. This has been great.
I guess what I would say is,
should we tell people what it is?
Well, I think we'll get to that. I want to build up to that.
Okay.
No, let's just get into that. Because I'm not going to ask you if you ever considered that, because I imagine Tony Bourdain he's a mentor and someone a lot of people aspire to. I don't know if you ever thought about that when you were writing this book, but we'll get into next. What is this book? So you can tell everybody about it. This podcast is brought to you by Meez, the culinary operating system for food professionals. As a chef and restaurant owner for the past 20 years, I was frustrated that the only technology that we had in the kitchen was financial or inventory software. Those are important, but they don't address the actual process of cooking, training, collaboration, and consistent execution. So I decided if it didn't exist, I'd do my best to get it built. So the current and next generation of culinary pros have a digital tool dedicated to their craft. If you're a chef, mixologist, operator, or generally if you manage recipes intended for professional kitchens, Meez is built just for you. Organize, share, prep, and scale your recipes like never before, and get laser-accurate food cost and nutrition analysis faster than you could imagine. Learn more at www.getmeez.com.
I mean, first of all, thank you for all of that, especially the mentioning Tony in that context. No, I mean, I don't think of this book as comparable to Kitchen Confidential. I don't think I'd ever say anything I did was. Even if I thought it, I don't think I would say it. The only way I've thought about it is that if you talk to people who started cooking professionally from around 2000 to maybe 2010, maybe a little less, but that 2000 is when Kitchen Confidential came out. And there's a whole generation of cooks and chefs who the two books that come up the most often, and this is so funny to me because it says everything. From that time, books that people said that made me want to be a chef. One is the French Laundry Cookbook.
Mm-hmm.
All the time. Anyone who started them, not anyone, but a lot of people, okay? Because they had never opened that book and it was like Oz, right? But then the other one is Kitchen Confidential, right? Which was the seedy underbelly, right? So for me, there was a point when I was writing it where I did one day look up from my laptop and I said to my wife, I would love for this book to make young people see the kitchen as a possible career option for themselves. People who maybe, all the classic profile. They're not doing that great in school, or they love to cook, but they didn't think they should pursue it professionally, or there's family resistance. A lot of that's not the way it used to be, but there are a lot of families where that is still, like, the families still freak out. There is still a lot of that pushback, or just the industry's invisible to certain people. But there is still that kind of headwind, right? And I would like to think that maybe, a young person who reads this book or is given this book by somebody who maybe thinks they have that kind of potential might read it and think, this world is kind of intriguing to me, And I really did try to write it. I want to be careful how I say it. Well, it's probably, what percentage of your listenership is industry? 100?
Probably.
Yeah. So I may not need to say this, but honestly, this book is accessible to the mainstream, but for me, this was a book for the cooks. This is a book for the chefs. This is a book for the farmers. This is a book for the delivery people. This is a book, anyone who works in a kitchen. I wrote this book for them. And the way you kind of see that is, and this is why I think it can be read by anybody, is I do explain a lot about how things are working in the kitchen, because even if you've worked in a kitchen, every kitchen is its own universe, right? No two kitchens are exactly the same. And so I explain a lot of the protocols and things there. But when I use kitchen language or restaurant language, I just use it and I footnote the explanation, right? So I don't take a paragraph to explain certain things.
I noticed that.
Right? And that was because I wanted people in the industry to feel like it was for them and they could just skip all that stuff. And I wanted people who weren't in the industry to have the information available. A lot of it's intuitive, like walk in, and then asterisk, walk in refrigerator. But if you can't figure that out, there's a footnote,
What was fun about that was that, first of all, it is very clearly something that we'll call them consumers and then industry both will enjoy. It's actually nice to sometimes read the footnote of how you explain something that we know in our nomenclature, just because we see it, because sometimes we never even think about how we would explain what that means.
Right, like chef de cuisine.
Yeah. Or corner or something like that,
right.
And we just say it.
Yeah. But so that was the intention. And what the book is, we still haven't gotten to it, is I take one dish at a restaurant in Chicago and I tell the story of all the principal people whose life and work comes together in that one dish. So in the restaurant, you meet everybody. You meet the dishwasher, you meet the line cook, you meet the sous chef, the chef de cuisine, the chef owners, you meet the server. And then beyond the restaurant, you meet all the farmers whose proteins and vegetables, herbs, and even in one case, wine, because there's a red wine reduction in the sauce. I went to all the farms. I spent time with all the farmers. You get a little view of how they do what they do, but you also get the story behind the farm. I was very fortunate to be able to interview an immigrant who's documented, but who at one time wasn't. So I was able to include one person's immigrant story. That's a very touchy thing around farming. But I saw an opportunity I actually came back on a second trip just to drive out to Michigan and meet this person, because I didn't dare ask about it live. That's such a third rail if you're a journalist at a farm. But
so I have to back you up for a second, because I think you're underplaying by saying you meet these people, because I think part of the beauty of this book is you actually really deeply get to know a part of each of these people in a way that helps you understand why they are in the kitchen or in the front of house, and why they interact the way they do, and why they approach the recipe the way they do, or approach the customer the way they do. You more than meet them. You're telling the story of how they got there and why, and what's their family background, and what challenges or, turbulence did they go through in their life, and what struggles. And that for me is a big part of the meat of the book is you get to know all these people, and then you see them finish a dish or take it to the table. and it's like your friend that you see doing this work, and you're way more connected to it. Ironically, someone that works at meez knows and worked with
the server in the book, Nusha. Yeah.
But maybe you could talk a little bit about that, about the stories, and did that change anything for you as you got to know more about these people?
I mean, in all honesty, for me, not real. I mean, as you said, I've had my podcast now for 6 years, a little more than 6 years now. I've interviewed, several hundred people now. So, I mean, it did strike me, the concentration of stories under one roof. There was a moment in the interviewing where I was kind of like, there are things that haven't changed about the industry. As reputable as it's become, it is still kind of a haven for people who just don't fit anywhere else. It still is. Most people in the book, and I would include some of the farmers. I would definitely include Mark, the truck driver I profile, who's a really smart, funny, quick on his feet guy. And, people I think are like, why is, he told me, it's in the book, that friends of his, say he's doing grunt work. There's only one job in the book I don't think I could probably do if I was trained, and it's that job, being a truck driver in a big city, delivery driver.
Yeah.
That is,
a lot of Tetris too.
I learned a lot. I had no idea. All I've ever seen, to your point before, all I'd ever seen is people coming in with the hand truck. I didn't realize they're probably illegally parked. They are worried about getting boxed in. There's all these considerations, and it's sometimes they don't know how to get into the building. Sometimes the loading area is closed when it's supposed to be open. They just have a hand truck. They don't have like a laundry bin, so like they may have to make 2 or more trips. And that, I say it in the book. I think there could be a reality show called Delivery Wars. Like give 2 truck drivers a cargo area full of stuff and see who finishes first, and with the least parking tickets.
Oh my God.
So to see a concentration of all this around one dish, that did strike me. I did learn, I didn't know this before, amazingly, it had never come up, and it came up with 3 different people in the kitchen at Wherewithal, which is the restaurant I write about in the book. There were 3 people there who were skateboarders as kids. And I've started asking, it's come up since then, and it really struck me. I didn't know skateboarding was like a thing. I know a lot of chefs play guitar, I know a lot of chefs like individual sports, like they like golfing, they like fly fishing, they like tennis, as adults, they still do this stuff, right? Skateboarding had never, but that, especially in the Midwest, that's a thing.
Yeah.
With cooks. That's a minor thing. But for me, after this many years covering, I was like, oh, it's good to still be able to like pick up something like that.
At least for me, I picked up this sort of learning lesson like around leadership when you focus on this one dish, and as a chef, we might be like myopically focused on like, make sure this thing gets done right. And the thing that I took away from it is the importance of like really getting to know the background of your team and where they come from and what struggles they had, what did they do, what didn't they do, because you can manage them better and you can help them, perform better and be happier. And so often in the kitchen, you just get them in and you're just like, come on, let's go. And you might like a year and a half later learn that about them when they're gone. If you knew all these things in the beginning, it's a very different, environment and a different perspective when you're leaving them.
Years ago, I interviewed somebody's sous chef. This person may be listening. If they are, I don't mean this in a critical way, but I had gotten to interview someone on their team, and the person told me that their dad had been a chef, and they used to go with their dad to work, and that's how they got interested in becoming a chef. And then I was talking to the chef owner, and I said, hey, did you know so-and-so's dad was a chef? And like he didn't know, The other thing that comes to mind, I got to interrupt for 1 second. The other thing about the dish is it's not a series of profiles. It is told during a service. So you basically follow one dish through its production over 75 minutes in the kitchen.
What's the dish?
I'll tell you 1 second.
Okay.
So, and as different people are handling different elements of the dish, things that are going to go on the plate, there's a little break, and you either get a profile of that person or you get a profile of the farm where the stuff comes from. To me, it's like when I was trying to sell the project, I was like, think of it as like a website, So you see this and you can like click on the person and like their biography would open up, right?
Oh, that's cool.
And except you don't have that kind of control, but that's kind of what it's like. The dish is a dry aged strip loin with tomato and a red wine reduction and sorrel.
Yep.
And for people in the Midwest who may know these names, the strip loin comes from Slagle, which is a very popular meat purveyor. It's about 2 hours south of Chicago. The tomatoes come from Nichols Farm and Orchard, which is an institution. Lloyd Nichols started that business back in the 70s. I spent an afternoon with Lloyd. It was very memorable. And then the herbs, the rosemary and thyme that are in the sauce come from Smith's Farm, which is predominantly an herb farm that is, maybe 50 minutes from where the restaurant is. And then the sorrel comes from Butternut Sustainable Farms, which is in Michigan. And the wine comes from Wincroft, which is a winery also amazingly in Michigan. And that's the dish. And I have to add, because I know it'll come up at some point, I didn't know what the dish was going to be. This goes to my point about not being a food writer. I picked the restaurant based on having met Beverly Kim. This was a restaurant that Beverly Kim and her husband and co-chef, co-owner Johnny Clark had in Chicago. They also have Parachute Restaurant, which is more well-known. I had sold the idea for the book without a restaurant yet. I sold the concept. I needed basically a restaurant that would give me access and serve as like the material for the book, right? And because it was during COVID, I usually only interview people in person. I was doing remote interviews, and I did an interview with Beverly Kim. And she was such an open book, and she was so thoughtful and had so much energy. And she and Johnny have amazing reputations. I didn't want to have a situation where I felt like I had to brush garbage under the rug. I've had moments like that in my career, and I've had those crossroads, and I don't like them. It's just not what I'm not interested in being that person. I generally just don't do those interviews. If there's writers and chefs know stories often before they break, and often writers know stories that are being worked on.
Yeah.
When the Ken Friedman story broke, we all knew that was coming, So I really wanted to veer away from anybody who would cause me that kind of internal stress. I just generally am on my show. If there's somebody who I kind of know to be a bad seed, I just don't book them. That was a part of it. And wherewithal, the restaurant in the book changed its menu every week. So I did not know. I landed on a Sunday. The restaurant was open Tuesday through Saturday. I landed on Sunday. That Monday morning, before I started trailing and observing at the restaurant for a week, I had a coffee with Beverly and Johnny. And at one point, Johnny took out a notebook and he goes, well, here's what I'm thinking for the dish. Because I had told them, because it's told in service time, I was going to be focusing on the meat dish, which was the last savory dish, because it would give me the most time to play with.
Yeah.
Right? Like I couldn't focus on, the grains course that comes like 20 minutes into the meal.
Yeah, of course.
There's not enough space, right? And there's not enough components and all that. So it wasn't even finalized until... This is how that restaurant operated until the first day I was at the restaurant.
Yeah, which you learn in the book as well. Their sort of process around how they create.
It was a very stressful, but Johnny admits to this, it's a love-hate thing. He works really well under the gun.
Yeah.
But the pressure he puts on himself is also a little tortuous, right? But I think I relate to that as a writer.
Yeah, that was a ballsy move, picking the dish before you knew it.
Well, I picked the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. This goes back to my thing. I write about people. I don't write about food, That's
a great point. What I think was really interesting about the premise of this is that I would love to hear this same story for so many other restaurants. Have you ever thought about like scaling this and having it be a series of these stories?
I had this notion that if it all went well, maybe I would do a series of books. I was kind of dissuaded from that by my agent because I didn't know this, but most book series, you just go down in terms of sales.
Yeah.
From the first one to the next one to the next one to the next. I didn't know that. It's also, I've already sold my next project, the idea. So I'm already working on my next book. And I couldn't wait to see how this one sold to even contemplate whether a publisher would let me do a sequel. I don't mind saying this sounds really obnoxious, but I just recently signed with a management company in Los Angeles in the entertainment realm. What you are talking about would probably most reasonably be done as a docuseries.
Yeah.
And that's actively being pursued.
Yeah,
We
that
actually,
makes
I
sense.
can't really get into it, but I had optioned the idea off to some producers, and we shot a sizzle reel, and that just didn't work out. But so now I have someone trying to, ferret out the next producer who should have it. But if anybody wants to talk to that person, get in touch with me. I'll connect you. Yeah, I would love to see it as a doc series, and my idea is 1 week could be a restaurant like the one in the book. The next week could be a food truck in Austin. The next week could be a mom and pop restaurant in, Nashville. I mean, you could do a pop-up. You could do everything.
Yeah, it'd be great. It'd be great TV. I mean, I think you could just keep doing it too, even if it was the same concept of a restaurant, just hearing more of these stories. Because
no, that's what I'm saying. You pick one dish each time,
yeah.
But I'd want it to be, it might be a barbecue joint or, whatever, you could do it.
What was the editing process like for you? Or in general, maybe not just for this book? Like, are things that got cut out of this book anything notable that didn't make it into the book? Or
I mean, this book, not so much. It's kind of a nice, small, manageable. I really wanted a manageable book after Chef's Drugs and Rock and Roll. So no, I didn't write much I wasn't going to use. I mean, the format was so logical. And it's funny. I think it's because I used to be a wannabe screenwriter, and screenplays are all about structure. Like, I remember even my agent, he was like, so each chapter will be a profile or be like the story of an ingredient. I'm like, no, I'm going to tell it during service. And like, originally I didn't even want to have chapters. I was telling my agent, my editor, I was like, I want it to be like an epic poem. I just want it to be one long, unbroken thing, like a service is.
Yeah.
And then my very supportive publisher editor, Peter Hubbard, who I did not know before this book, who's been a godsend to me. It's the first time I've ever sold my next project to the same person who bought my last project. He said, write it however you want, and then let's figure it out. We had toyed with different ideas, and then I hit on the idea of, we had toyed with putting little markers of time or something in the margin. That was a thought. I'd actually mocked one up myself during the writing process. And then I settled on this idea of like all the chapters are like kind of parts of the day or the week in a restaurant, right?
Yeah.
So it's like prep, menu meeting, service, pre-shift, right?
Yeah.
And those kind of give you just break points. If you want to put the book down for the night or whatever, you have a break point. But other than that, it is told during a service from start to finish. And this isn't a brag. It's just the way my mind is wired. But, a lot of people said to me, how are you going to do that? How are you going to tell that during a service? I say this in the introduction. I woke up with this idea one day. I literally dreamt the idea, woke up with the idea. And that's how I saw it.
Yeah.
And, you said you loved the ending. The specifics of what's happening in the kitchen, obviously I couldn't have known that. But the end, the very end was how I pitched the book. I always knew, I don't want to say what it is.
Yeah.
But that was always going to be the ending of the book.
Yeah.
Always.
Incredible ending. But the ending is actually not a microcosm. I guess a macrocosm for a lot of the transitions that actually happen in the book of what you're talking about, because you will cut away during service to the story of Taylor, and then you
Who's
cut
the chef
back
de cuisine.
the chef de cuisine, and then you cut back to her, doing something in the kitchen, and that sort of connectivity there of you just heard her backstory and the small town and all these things, and then she's in the kitchen, and so you have this sort of connectivity that really makes like it more special, and that's exactly how I feel. The ending is very similar to that. But maybe is there like can you give a little teaser, a little quip from the book that you think?
A teaser?
Yeah, is any little like micro story from here that you think would be that we could share? I don't want to give away too much of the book.
I mean, my favorite thing in the book, because again, it was the thing I knew the least about, is the day I spent with Mark, the truck driver.
Yeah,
that was I met him in Marengo, Illinois, which was I made the drive out at 2 a.m, so there was literally zero traffic. The car service I called, the driver could have easily murdered me and disappeared my body. Like, it would have been very easily done. I met this guy at 2:30 in. I'd never met him before. Nick Nichols, who's one of Lloyd's sons, who basically runs the business now, the Sons, I wrote him and said, is there any way I could go out on a delivery run? And he paired me up with Mark. And this guy, first of all, as a character in the book, he was like manna from heaven. I mean, he was totally open. I say in the book, like his, the way he's dressed and his personality, even though he's 60, he might remind you of your favorite camp counselor. He's just this funny, affable guy. He kibitzes with all that's New York for chats it up with all of like everybody he was making deliveries to. He would come in and be like, "Hey, everybody, I got lots of great fruits and vegetables for you guys," and then in between, like in the truck, he was telling me his story. He was answering all my technical questions. But then I was also getting an education on what it takes to pilot a delivery truck for a farm in a big city. It's like I say in the introduction to the book, I wrote this book in some ways so I could learn how all these dots I've seen over the years are connected. I've been to 1 million farms. I've been to 1 million restaurants. I've never been with the delivery guy, never. And that was a revelation. I mean, did you find that entertaining? I think that is, like in my mind, I was like, that could be a New Yorker piece.
Well,
I was so...
My father was for a long period of time, did that that was his job.
Oh, really?
And so I went to work with him all the time.
Yeah.
So when I read that, it just reminded me of being a kid, being in the van with him.
Oh, wow.
Going through the streets of DC. So I think maybe I just had a cognitive bias because I grew up with that. But
I did have one funny moment. There's a, I don't even know how it's categorized. It's called Beyond, BIAN. And it's like a composite health club.
It's from Kevin Boehm, right?
Kevin Boehm from Boca Restaurant Group. It's a side project. It's not part of Boca, but Kevin and I are friends. And I had been in there after hours with Kevin because he wanted to show me around. And, the place was locked. And it's a beautiful facility. And one of the things that's in there is they have a little restaurant. I was in there with Kevin in the music. They have a music room. I think it's five. They have five. It's either 500 or 1,000 vinyl albums and a very expensive, amazing sound system. And I was in there after hours with him to see all this. And then when I was in the truck with Mark, he was making one of his deliveries was to a place he had never been before, and he kept referring to it as Bane. And I say in the book, like I thought of like the Tom Hardy villain in The Dark Knight Rises, And it turned out it was Beyond, and it was Kevin's place. And I, just because I'm a normal, hopefully decent human being, I spent the day with Mark. So I would help them. I would carry a box, or I would, if there was a little tray of cherry tomatoes, I would carry that, because they're delicate. Yep. So I was in shorts and a t-shirt making a delivery there. And I was like, I really hope Kevin's here because that would be really funny, but it didn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny. I actually never thought about that. That's how I grew up, was little hand carts with boxes through the streets of DC, going upstairs or elevators sometimes and through multiple streets to like deliver nuts and candy and things. And it's early mornings and sometimes during the day. I want to talk a little bit about some of the other projects that are in the pipeline that you've been talking about, but I want to wrap up. Anything else you want to share about the dish? And also, well, we're going to be releasing this when it comes out, but where to get it and anything else folks should know?
I mean, you can get it anywhere books are sold. It's published by Mariner Books, which is an imprint of HarperCollins, which means I have great distribution. All the big online sellers. You can go, if you Google Andrew Friedman, The Dish, one of the first 1 or 2 results that'll come up is the HarperCollins page for the book. And from there, you can go to your favorite bookseller. It'll put you on their site. And I personally would love, if you're actually going to do it, if you're not going to do it, order it online. But I personally would love if you went to a local independent bookstore and purchased it there. They'll love it if you do that. But yeah, basically anywhere you would go to find a book starting on October 17th, you should be able to find it.
All right, October 17th. Got it.
Yeah, and I'll be visiting some cities, I should say.
Oh, cool. What
So
cities?
I'll be doing, there may be an event in Chicago. I'm not sure yet. Some of these details aren't ironed out yet, but I will be in Miami. I'll be in Houston at one point. I'm going to be in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And in New York, I'm doing 2 events this fall and then one in January, like in conversation with
nice
events. I love this era of being an author where you don't have to go up anymore and like just present, for 40 minutes. That is very stressful.
Yeah, Q&A is much
being
more
in, you just got to get the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can say this, the one that's fully locked is there is a wonderful, relatively new bookstore / coffee shop / podcast studio called P&T Knitwear in Lower Manhattan. And I'm going to be there November 14th at 7 p.m. And I will be in conversation with Amanda Hesser.
Oh, nice.
And I'm very excited about that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, go get the book. It's incredible.
Thank you.
It will be also a great timing to gift it for the holidays.
Thank you.
What else is the pipeline? You got a bunch of other stuff going on. You're a busy guy.
We mentioned that I'm doing some teaching now. My show continues. Are we competitors? Can I say I've started doing these special conversations, mixing those in with the biographical interviews, like just 30-minute newsy kind of things with people. That's been fun. And also I do those remote. So it opens up the possible guests for the show. Because it's not as personal a thing. So I don't mind not being in the same space with the guests. I mean, it's his book, but I don't know how to say what I would say without it sounding hokey. I'm very excited, honored. I'm collaborating with Daniel Boulud on a book. He does not like the word memoir. He's not alone in this, but he thinks it makes it sound like you're done. And I think he's probably busier now than he's ever been in his career. But I'm collaborating on what I'm referring to as the story of his 40 years in New York, which is how it started. He actually texted me in fall of 2020 when we were all locked up at home and said, "What do you I'm thinking about writing I'm coming up on 40 years in New York. What do you think?" And I said, "Sounds amazing." And 2 days later, I wish I had I have a picture of him, but I wish I had a picture of the two of us because we were, that was pre-vaccine. It was still peak COVID. We were like, across we were in the empty dining room of Danielle, which had been dormant for 6 months at that point, sitting across a table from each other with masks on, doing interview sessions for the proposal. That'll be out in 2025. We don't deliver it for another year. I'm doing 2 other book projects. I probably shouldn't say yet who they're with. And then I've sold my next book project, which I guess I don't mind talking about, but I'm going to do a book about restaurant openings.
Oh.
So this is the dish. My next book's going to be The Opening. And that's
a stressful fucking time.
But that's good. Again, same publisher to what I was saying before about the business of publishing. That's a book that can live on its own, but it's named in a similar fashion. So hopefully people they'll make the connection with me and with this. And it's similar. I'm taking 4 restaurants from different types of operators in different parts of the country and writing about their restaurant from inception to opening. That's
cool. Well, we could all use some therapy, maybe in the form of a book on restaurant openings. Anybody that's opened a restaurant can tell you it sucks. No matter what, it's never been fun. So, there are fun parts of it for sure. Ursula's in the background thumbing down right now.
But those are the things that that's awesome, man. That's how I'm keeping out of trouble.
You are definitely busy. Anything else you want to share with the audience?
It's really weird. When I was a kid, I was always told, like, don't talk about yourself, talk about, whoever you're talking to. So despite the fact that we've been sitting here talking about me for an hour and 15 minutes, if you're asking me to like offer up something, proactively on my own, I don't know. Actually, I don't know what it would be.
How about,
at this point, it would be my personal life. I'm looking for people to play tennis with in New York City.
Oh, yeah. You moved away from me, so we can't play near me anymore. Ursula lives in Brooklyn. She'll play.
Do you play?
Really badly, but I will play.
Okay. We can hit.
What's the deal with pickleball? What is it? Now, I want to know because I keep seeing all the kids playing pickleball, but now also adults.
Here's the thing.
It's a big thing.
I don't have a problem with pickleball. I guess it's more of a sport than golf.
Is it like mini tennis? What is it?
It's like ping pong without the table. The reason tennis people largely loathe pickleball, it's not the fact of pickleball. It is a lot of tennis courts are being used as pickleball courts, and tennis courts are hard to come by, at least in a place like New York.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in Southern California or where I grew up in Miami, you can go to any local high school and play tennis on their courts. But New York City, there's fewer courts every year. They're taking our real estate, and that sucks. And that's what's annoying. And
is it a different ball, a different racket?
It's a big paddle, and it's is it a plastic? It's like a plastic ball. It has holes in it. I've only ever seen doubles. I think it's always doubles.
It sounds like the modern day badminton.
That's not far off. But
by the way, badminton was a pretty big
Well,
game for a while.
you get a bounce in pickleball,
Yeah.
but as I say, it is more athletic than golf. I'll give it that.
All right.
And darts. It's more athletic than darts.
We can't end on pickleball though. So
Thank you.
Okay, if you don't want to,
Well, I don't have anything to say about pickleball.
Okay.
Except stop taking our courts pickleball.
So why don't you maybe we are a little bit competitors. You're more of someone we aspire to, and
thanks.
we probably do it for different reasons.
But you also support my show.
And we support your show.
You are
that's
one
right.
of my sponsors.
Yeah, that's right. We love your show so much that we support it.
Thank you.
And we sponsor it at Meez. And I think we also somewhat different approaches to how we do it. But any advice on podcasting from what you learned? Well, for me or for anybody else? The last 6 years of what you've done?
Yeah. Preparing is really important. I compare the whole podcasting thing to like whatever it was 15, 20 years ago when blogs started happening. Like the barrier to entry is very low.
Yeah.
So, for like $100, you can have a podcast on the air. You pay for some platform. I use Simplecast that, projects it onto all the different, we pay for a service that shoots you out to all the different platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all that stuff. It's really easy actually to get your podcast out there. If you don't take time to learn about tech, you could record on your iPhone. I've been interviewed by people on their iPhone, or you can do what you do and what I do. You can get some decent mics and a decent recorder, and you can set yourself up for under $1,000, not much under, but you can. But, the barrier to entry is really low, so it's really easy to do it and suck at it.
Yeah.
I've seen it a million. I mean, I'm not going to name anybody. Some of these people I'm very friendly with. But have you noticed there have been all these celebrity chef podcasts that have just come and gone? People are like, hey, everybody, I got a new podcast. And like 6 episodes later, they're gone.
Yeah.
Because to do anything of quality, you got to prep, you got to record. You either have to learn how to mix and edit yourself or hire someone to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You got to make the time for the interview, and you got to keep it fresh. You got to keep it lively. I think people, it's like with the blog thing, they didn't know what they were getting into, and they're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And then it just becomes, you go on their blog, like, a lot of restaurants have like on the tabs on their website, it says blog.
Yeah.
And you go to the blog and their last post was from like 2015. Like it's really, anyway, that's one, like be serious about it. Talk to someone who's done it, get advice, find out what, minimal tech would make you sound professional. And then, whenever I teach about podcasting, the phrase I use, which I think is my phrase, but it's podcasting is performance, right? You got to bring it. Your energy has to go up when you're on air. Some people are naturally like that. I'm not. I've had many people tell me, like, as soon as I get a mic in my hand, and this happened this morning, I just become a totally different person, or a more emphatic person.
Mm-hmm.
A more emphatic person. That's something that's taken time. If you go back and listen to the first episodes, my intros are horrible. They are horrible. My wife, for a while, did the intros with me, starting with the 4th episode of the show, because I sounded like the most stilted. I sounded like a newsman from like 1950, standing in front of a crime scene. It was very formal and stilted and terrible, just terrible. But you know what? Case in point, I script them now.
Yeah.
For myself. I mean, I do the whole thing myself, which is crazy. But I've also become, this is a funny story. There's a chef, I'm not even sure if she's still in the city. I think she is, but there was a really talented chef named Claire Welly, Welle. She used to be the chef at Otway in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
She hasn't been there in quite some time. For a hot minute, she was the chef de cuisine at Contra, which is sadly closing. That was several years ago too. But, I went to interview Claire. We had only met when I had come to dinner at the restaurant. Claire and I were talking, and she said, what's your process? And I said, well, we're going to record. We recorded. You saw that. I said, I spend a ridiculous amount of time editing, and I'm trying to just let more things go. And I think I've said this on air before. I keep meaning to write her. I've never told her this because we don't hang out.
Yeah.
But after I do these shows, I forget to tell her. I said, I'm trying to, live with, imperfections. And she goes really, really emphatically, she goes, no, do not do that. Your show is a listening experience, and you should stick to making it sound as good as possible.
Yeah.
And that comment has probably cost me hundreds of hours of my life. I'm not even kidding. because I was right at the point of just being like, I mean, I know people say this a lot, but this is clinical for me. Like I've been diagnosed, I take medicine, but like I have OCD, ADHD. So A, it's hard for me to do it. And B, I can't let it go.
Yeah.
Right. So I will sit there and like, take a scalpel to like, a composite or 2 sentences that got mushed together by the speaker and try to make it into, I'll do like 5 cuts to try to make it sound like one unbroken sentence.
Yeah.
That's like a 10-minute exercise.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
That's plus now I stopped paying an engineer. I now, during COVID, thanks to YouTube, I taught myself how to mix, right? I mix my own sound now. So I do all of that. I think it matters. But, I do when people review the show on like Apple Podcasts or when they write to me, there are people who mention the sound quality, including other podcasters. I got this lovely note. I don't think he'd mind me saying it last year from Eli Culp in Philadelphia, who also does a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, Eli, one of the things he said to me about the show was he said, the production values are really good. And I just feel like I don't know.
No, I think
I feel like, you got to have your standards.
I agree. It's important. And this is our first ever in-person, because we use different equipment at home. Being a chef, that's the preparedness was like the only thing that I was freaked out about in the beginning. And it's funny how many of the guests are like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that you did so much research and you looked up. I was like, isn't that the job? Isn't that what we're supposed to do?
Right. But you know why they're surprised? Because they've gone into a bunch of interviews where either people hadn't, so they come in cold and say things like, so where are you from?
Yeah.
Who was your mentor? Or I used to have this very obnoxious mid-show thing I would play. And it was like, it had music under it. And it was all these people saying nice things about the show. And actually on my computer, the file of that audio says ATTC for Andrew Talks to Chefs. And then it says obnoxious mid-show. But one of the lines that I pulled and put in that little montage was David Kinch on one of the first 10 episodes we did. I thanked him at the end and he said, it's always a pleasure. I love talking to you because you never ask me my favorite ingredient or my favorite kitchen gadget.
God. Yeah.
But chefs they're all tired of that.
Yeah.
So I think the reason people say that to you is because they've gotten conditioned now to people just having this one size fits all like questionnaire or just working their. This is the other thing I would say. You have to be alive to the conversation that's happening, right? Like you can't just work through a list of questions. If you want to have a really good show, if somebody says something, you got to treat it like a conversation. You got to get comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
One of my favorite moments ever, I did a live interview with Prithi Mistry at San Francisco Cooking School, which sadly doesn't exist anymore. It was 2019. Prithi and I had never met, and we agreed not to do a pre-interview because I wanted it to be, fresh. And Prithi was comfortable with that. So we're doing this interview, and they're very animated. Prithi, the way they talk, right? And in the middle of the thing, spontaneously, and this was in front of like 100 people, I said, you're very demonstrative when you talk. Do you have any theater in your background? And Prithi gave me this look and said, no one's ever asked me that before. But I wouldn't have known to ask it in my research.
Yeah.
It was because Prithi was so funny and, making, a lot of body gesturing that kind of underscored what was being said. And it led to this amazing 10-minute conversation that had never been discussed in an interview.
Yeah.
Right? But that wasn't on my Q&A. That was just from being in conversation with someone. I tell people if you can pull it off, just imagine you're, found yourself next to this person at a party.
Yeah.
And you're having a conversation.
No, I couldn't agree more. I start now, we didn't do this because in person, but whenever we start from my office, I just start recording as soon as they get on the call. Like Mark Forgione and I just hopped on a call. We talk somewhat often. We did the podcast. He came on. And the first 10 minutes, it was really just like us catching up on a call. And then we just started doing some interview things. But we spent 10 minutes talking about doing mushrooms and raising our kids. And then I was like, oh, yeah, we're on a podcast.
Did he know you were recording?
Yeah, he knew. We just started, I think we know each other. So we just started talking. And that's how I start every podcast now is I just start talking. And usually what ends up happening is the guest is a little taken off and they're like, is that okay? Should we record this? And I was like, just talk. Do your thing.
See, I should probably do that because I often will go, like I interviewed Anthony Mangieri from Una Pizza Napoletana. And I only met him when I came in for dinner once, and I met him, but we didn't know each other. And do you know him?
I mean, I know of him. I don't know him
he's
personally.
The greatest guy. He is, soulful guy, really open. And I got there and we talked for an hour before I started recording. An hour.
Yeah, you should have recorded that.
I should have recorded it.
Yeah.
That happens all the time.
All the
That's
time.
happened to me with Greg Backstrom, I think, almost every time we've interviewed. It just, yeah.
Yeah.
Although I will say it's not calculated, but I do feel like that kind of time. When I was doing Chef's Drugs and Rock and Roll, I would always hang for a little before the interview because I want to give people a chance to kind of get a sense of me because I come in peace generally. And I think that's something, nothing makes most journalists happier than getting some dirt or a juicy quote or, and I'm not unless someone is, intentionally saying that to me, I'm not looking for that. I don't embarrass people. I've taken stuff out of episodes that I wasn't even asked to. Like sometimes an older guest will say something horribly politically incorrect. I don't mean racist or anything. They'll just say something what could generously be called passé, and I'll just take it out because I'm like, this person is going to get hammered, and they don't mean anything by it. You know, they're just like a little bit. They're just a little bit out of step.
That's nice of you. Well, Andrew, this was quite a pleasure.
Thank you, Josh. I hope I didn't talk too much.
You talked just enough, and this was so nice doing it outside.
Isn't it?
We had a lot of Emily, Ursula, thanks for managing or trying to manage all the crazy noise, but this was great. We need to do more outside things. But thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks for all the kind words about the dish.
They're genuine. I mean, congratulations. And I can't wait for it to be out for everybody to buy in stores or online. So, all right, man.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye. Thanks for tuning into the Meez podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist, Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmeez.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little bit better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.